At Christmas dinner, my stepmom raised her glass and said, "Let's toast to the children who actually appreciate what they have." My half-sister smirked. I wasn't even acknowledged. I'd paid off their mortgage that morning, a $190,000 surprise gift. So I stood up, opened my banking app, and reversed the payment in front of everyone. My dad's face went from smiling to shaking in under 10 seconds. I, 32M, had been planning this Christmas gift for 2 years, carefully saving and investing every spare dollar I could manage. The mortgage payoff was supposed to be my way of showing Dad and his family that I'd made it, that despite everything, I still cared. Looking back now, I realize how foolish that sounds. The tension in my relationship with my stepmom had been building for over a decade, ever since Dad remarried when I was 19. She brought her daughter into our lives, and gradually, I felt myself being pushed to the margins of what used to be my family. The subtle comparisons started almost immediately. My half-sister could do no wrong, while my accomplishments were met with polite nods and quick topic changes. I'd built a successful software consulting business, working 70-hour weeks for years to get it off the ground. The money came eventually, but the recognition from Dad never did. He'd show up to my half-sister's community theater performances, but couldn't make time for the launch party when my company landed its first major client. When I bought my house, he spent 5 minutes on the tour before talking about my half-sister's apartment search for the rest of the evening. The pattern was clear, but I kept telling myself that family was family, that blood meant something. That Christmas morning, I'd woken up early and made the transfer. $190,000, wiping out their mortgage completely. I'd coordinated with their bank weeks earlier, making sure everything would process smoothly. My hands had trembled slightly as I confirmed the transaction, but I felt good about it. This would change things, I thought. This would show them I was serious about being part of this family. The dinner was at their house, the same suburban ranch Dad had bought when he remarried. I arrived at 4 with wine and flowers, the same ritual I performed every holiday. My stepmom answered the door with her usual tight smile, the kind that never quite reached her eyes when directed at me. She thanked me for the wine and mentioned that my half-sister had brought a much nicer bottle, something she'd picked up on her recent trip to Napa. Dad hugged me in the entryway, and for a moment, I felt that old warmth. But then my half-sister called from the kitchen, needing help with something trivial, and he disappeared. I stood there holding my coat, waiting for someone to remember I existed. The meal preparation continued around me. I offered to help multiple times, but my stepmom had everything under control, she said. My half-sister was already handling the tasks that needed doing. I could just relax in the living room if I wanted. So I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone, feeling like a guest in what should have been a family gathering. Dinner itself was elaborate. My stepmom had outdone herself with a spread that must have taken days to prepare. The table was set with their wedding china, candles flickering between dishes of roasted vegetables and herb-crusted prime rib. My half-sister sat across from me, talking animatedly about her new job at a nonprofit. Dad listened with rapt attention, asking follow-up questions, genuinely engaged in a way I couldn't remember him being with me in years. I waited for the right moment to tell them about the mortgage. I'd practiced the words a dozen times. I wanted it to come across as genuine, not as showing off. I planned to mention it casually, maybe after dessert, just let them know I'd taken care of something that had been worrying them. Dad had mentioned the mortgage burden a few times over the past year, how the payments were getting harder as he approached retirement. But then dessert was served, and my stepmom stood up with her wine glass. She'd had a few drinks by this point, her cheeks flushed with that particular glow people get when they're feeling self-satisfied and slightly drunk. She cleared her throat, and everyone looked up expectantly. She started talking about gratitude, about how blessed they were to have children who appreciated the sacrifices parents made. Her words were directed at my half-sister, her eyes locked on her daughter with obvious pride. She went on about how some children understood the value of family, how they showed up not just physically, but emotionally. My half-sister was nodding, soaking up the praise. Then came the toast. My stepmom raised her glass higher and said it clearly, with perfect diction. "Let's toast to the children who actually appreciate what they have." My half-sister smirked, that particular expression I'd seen 100 times before, the one that said she knew exactly who was being excluded from this moment. Dad was smiling, raising his own glass, completely oblivious or deliberately ignorant of the knife his wife was twisting. I wasn't acknowledged. Not a glance, not a mention. I sat there with my wine glass in hand, invisible. Something cracked inside me in that moment. It wasn't anger exactly, not at first. It was clarity. 2 years of saving, months of planning, $190,000 transferred that very morning, and I was being toasted around like I didn't exist. Like I wasn't sitting right there at their table. My phone was in my pocket. I pulled it out and opened my banking app while they were still mid-toast. My hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been that morning. The transaction history loaded quickly. There it was, the mortgage payoff, processed and completed. And right below that, in smaller text, the option I'd built in with the bank. Reversal available within 24 hours for large transfers. I stood up. The movement caught their attention, and the toasting paused. They looked at me, confused. I didn't say anything at first, just turned my phone screen toward them and started the reversal process. The app required multiple confirmations for a transaction this large. Each tap was deliberate. My stepmom asked what I was doing, her voice sharp with that particular irritation she reserved for when I inconvenienced her. I still didn't speak, just kept tapping through the confirmation screens. Dad's expression was changing now, morphing from confusion into something like concern. The final confirmation screen appeared. I looked up at Dad directly and told him I'd paid off their mortgage that morning, all $190,000 of it. His face went blank. My stepmom's mouth opened slightly. My half-sister stopped smirking. Then I tapped the final confirmation button and held up the screen so they could all see it. Transaction reversed. The money was coming back to my account. The mortgage was back on their books. Dad's face went through several colors in rapid succession. His smile disappeared first, replaced by confusion, then understanding, then what looked like genuine distress. His hands started shaking as he processed what had just happened. He asked why, his voice barely above a whisper. I told him exactly why. I explained that I'd come to dinner expecting to be part of a family, that I'd given them a gift worth 2 years of my life's work, and that I'd been sitting right there when his wife toasted to children who appreciate what they have while excluding me entirely. I mentioned that I'd watched for over a decade as I was pushed further and further to the margins, as my half-sister became the golden child while I became the obligatory guest. My stepmom started to protest, saying I was overreacting, that the toast hadn't been about me at all. I asked her directly who else it could have been about, given that I was the only other child at the table. She didn't have an answer for that. My half-sister tried to defend her mother, saying I was being dramatic over a simple toast. I turned to her and listed out 3 years' worth of similar moments, times when I'd been deliberately excluded or minimized while she was celebrated. The community theater shows Dad never missed for her, but the business awards he'd skipped for me. The birthday dinners centered around her, while mine were forgotten until the day after. The constant comparisons where I always came up short. Dad finally found his voice and asked me to sit back down, to talk about this calmly. He looked genuinely shaken now, his hands still trembling as he reached for his wine glass. I told him there was nothing calm to discuss. I'd made my decision. The money was mine again, and I was leaving. My stepmom's shock turned to anger then. She raised her voice, calling me selfish and petty, saying I was trying to manipulate them with money. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me, but I didn't bother pointing it out. I just grabbed my coat from the entryway. Dad followed me to the door, pleading now. He said we could fix this, that maybe things had gotten out of hand, but we were still family. I asked him when the last time was that he'd treated me like family. He couldn't answer. He just stood there, and I could see the exact moment it hit him, the realization of how many years had passed with this pattern repeating. I told him I loved him, and I meant it. But I also told him that love wasn't enough anymore, not when it was one-sided. I'd spent over a decade trying to earn a place in this family, and I was done. The mortgage payoff would have been my last attempt, and they'd shown me exactly how much it meant during that toast. Update 1. I left their house and spent Christmas night in my own place, alone, but somehow more at peace than I'd felt in years. My phone started ringing around 9 that evening. Dad called 4 times. I let it go to voicemail each time. My stepmom texted a long message about how I'd ruined Christmas and embarrassed them in front of family. I didn't respond. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and a dozen text messages. Dad's voicemails were desperate, asking me to reconsider, saying we needed to talk. My half-sister had sent a message calling me vindictive and saying I'd shown my true colors. I deleted that one without reading it fully. 3 days after Christmas, Dad showed up at my house. I saw his car pull up through the window and considered not answering the door. But he was my father, and some part of me still wanted to believe this could matter to him. He looked terrible. His eyes were red, and he'd clearly been losing sleep. He asked if he could come in, and I let him. We sat in my living room, the same room he'd barely glanced at when I'd bought the place. He started apologizing immediately, saying he hadn't realized how bad things had gotten. He'd been blind to the way his wife treated me, blind to the favoritism he'd shown. He claimed he'd been trying to keep the peace in his marriage, trying to make his new family work, and somewhere in that process, he'd lost sight of me. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I asked him a simple question. I wanted to know if he would have noticed any of this if I hadn't reversed that payment. If I just quietly paid off their mortgage and left, would he have ever acknowledged the problem? He couldn't answer that honestly, and we both knew it. I told him I appreciated the apology, but apologies didn't fix a decade of neglect. I explained that the mortgage payment wasn't about the money. I could afford it. It was about recognition, about matching to the people who were supposed to matter most. And in that moment at dinner, when his wife made that toast, and he smiled along with it, I'd realized I didn't matter to them at all. Dad broke down then. Actual tears, something I'd seen maybe twice in my entire life. He said he understood if I couldn't forgive him, but he wanted to try. He wanted to rebuild what we'd lost. I told him I needed time. Real time, not just a few days until the guilt wore off. I needed to see actual change, not just words. If he wanted a relationship with me, it couldn't be on the same terms as before. I wouldn't be the peripheral child anymore, the one who got acknowledged when convenient. He agreed, though I could see the pain in his eyes. He left my house that afternoon, and I watched his car disappear down the street. Update 2. It's been 3 months now since that Christmas dinner. The aftermath has been more complicated than I expected. Dad has been trying. He calls me weekly, and not just quick check-ins. Actual conversations where he asks about my life and listens to the answers. He's come to my office to see the business I built, something he'd never shown interest in before. He asks about my projects, my challenges, my successes. It feels genuine, though part of me still wonders if it's just guilt driving him. My stepmom hasn't apologized. She sent one text message a week after Christmas, saying that if I expected them to beg for my money, I'd be disappointed. I didn't respond. According to Dad, she's convinced I orchestrated the whole thing for attention, that I planned the reversal from the start as some kind of power play. He doesn't defend her reasoning when he tells me this, which is something. My half-sister and I haven't spoken at all. I'm fine with that. Some relationships aren't worth salvaging. The interesting part came 6 weeks after Christmas when Dad called with news. He and my stepmom were in marriage counseling. The whole situation had apparently forced them to confront some fundamental issues in their relationship. He said the mortgage incident, he calls it an incident now, like it was an accident, made him realize how much influence she'd had over his relationship with me. He was working on setting boundaries. I don't know if their marriage will survive, and honestly, I'm not sure I care. That probably sounds cold, but I've spent enough years worrying about their happiness at the expense of my own. What I do know is that I'm done being the child who pays for love with money, attention, or endless patience. I'm done trying to earn a place I should have had by default. Dad asked me last week if I'd consider having dinner with him. Just the two of us. No stepmom, no half-sister, no big production. Just a meal and conversation. I agreed, with the understanding that this was a starting point, not a resolution. We're meeting next weekend. I've thought a lot about that moment at the Christmas table, my finger hovering over that final confirmation button. People have told me I was too harsh, that I should have talked it out instead of making such a dramatic statement. But I disagree. Sometimes dramatic statements are the only ones that get heard. That $190,000 reversal bought me something more valuable than gratitude ever could have. It bought me clarity. It showed me exactly where I stood, and it gave me permission to stand somewhere else. The mortgage is still on their books. They're managing the payments, apparently tightening their budget in ways my stepmom isn't happy about. Dad mentioned she complains about it regularly, another point of friction in their counseling sessions. I invested the money instead. It's sitting in a portfolio earning returns, growing larger every month. Maybe someday I'll use it for something meaningful, something that actually matters to people who matter to me. Or maybe I'll just keep it as a reminder of the price of self-respect. Either way, I'm not invisible anymore. Not to them, and more importantly, not to myself. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too.